Hello. Today is the second episode of my series about my life in Appalachia. And today I get to tell you about how we moved to Kentucky. Kelly and I married in January of 1985. And I was working at the King Quick, and he worked down the road at a nursing home as a cook. And we decided to get married on a very snowy January morning at the Justice of the Peace across the river in northern Kentucky. And we chose a Tuesday morning because both of us were off work in the morning, but we had to work that night. So we chose to get married that morning. My mom was there, and my dad was working, but my aunt was there, and my older brother and his wife were witnesses too. And then afterwards, we all went to a restaurant named Chi Chi's, and they were famous for their fried ice cream. Many months later, in January of '86, I was 6 months pregnant, and we moved to Kentucky. And we moved in with Kelly's mom and dad, Sallie and Redmond, and they just until we could get on our feet. And they had a small trailer. At this end, when you walked in the front door, was the kitchen, and the living room was here. And you walked down a little tiny hallway, and there was a bedroom on the left, and you kept going down that hallway, and there was a washer, dryer. More about that later. And then there was a bathroom next to that, and at this end of the trailer, Sallie and Redmond's bedroom, and there was a back door that went outside the trailer. We moved there and lived in that trailer with them for just a few months. And I distinctly remember in that month, we were in the living room watching television, and they had a little black and white TV. And I'm not kidding, the screen of that TV was only this big. And we were watching, and it was black and white. And we were watching something like Petticoat Junction or the Andy Griffith Show, I forget. And network news broke in to tell of the Challenger disaster, when the Challenger blew up after it had left Earth. And the teacher, Krista McAuliffe, I think was her name, was on there. And it's just horrific. And I'll never forget that. As you know, those things happen and you never forget them. They're on your mind, and you can remember where you were and what was going on around you when such disasters happen. And I distinctly remember being in that little tiny living room in that tiny trailer in Kentucky, tucked away in the bottom in the Appalachian Mountains. Yet we were part of that disaster on that little tiny black and white screen. Now, as I lived in that trailer for a few months with my mother-in-law and father-in-law, Sallie taught me how to cook their way. I had learned how to cook from my grandma, the Southwest Ohio way, and there was a whole nother way of learning to cook the Appalachian way. And so Sallie taught me how to cook breakfast. One morning, she sat there was a huge kitchen table that took up most of the kitchen in that little tiny trailer. It was shoved up against the wall, and there was a window there was a window on the wall of the kitchen, and it was one of those roll-out windows where the windows rolled out like that. And there was a cord, an orange electrical cord that was plugged in, and it went out the window, and it went up on a spike of like a 2x4, and it went over to my brother-in-law's and his wife's trailer, Enoch and Gladys's trailer. And I guess they were sharing electric. And anyway, I remember that table. It was a huge table. It was big enough for 6, 7, 8 people to sit at. It was up against that wall of the kitchen and this wall, the front wall of the trailer, and it sat there. It was barely enough room to get by it to open up the refrigerator door, and then there was the stove and then a sink right there. So Sallie sat at the table. Sallie had to wear oxygen a lot. She had a hard time breathing. But she taught me how to get out the iron skillet Everything was cooked in iron skillets. So I got the big iron skillet out, and there was a 25-pound bucket of lard under the sink. And right next to that, there was a 25-pound bucket of flour, and there was also a bucket of cornmeal. I got the iron skillet and got a great big huge spoonful dollop of lard and put it into that skillet and put it on the electric stove and melted it. And Sallie was telling me how to do this the whole way. She said, now, April, when that lard gets hot, you take your eggs and you fry your eggs. So I fried the eggs. They were fried over easy. And then once the eggs were fried, I got them out with the pancake turner and I put them on the plate. And then she said, now I'd get you a little scoop of flour and put some flour in that hot grease. I said, put it right in the hot grease. She said, put it right in that hot grease. So there was some grease still in the iron skillet. I put some up. She said, now just put a little bit in there, and then take your pancake turner. I call it a pancake turner, and then just go like this and just move it around until it becomes really, really brown. And it did. It became really, really brown, and it was getting all balled up. I thought it was going to burn. She said, don't let it burn. You'll be able to smell it when it burns. So I didn't let it burn. She said, now reach into that refrigerator and get some sweet milk. Now there's a difference between sweet milk and buttermilk. Buttermilk is sour milk. Regular milk is sweet milk. So I got the sweet milk out, and she said, just pour your little bit into that skillet. And I did. And then I stirred it around really fast. And then she said, get you some salt and put it in there. And I did that. And I stirred it around. And of course, it made gravy. And the gravy was about the color of a cardboard box. It was real pretty and brown, and it was very, very smooth. I didn't think it would, I thought it would be lumpy. I had never made, this is called breakfast gravy. So I made that breakfast gravy. But before that, I forgot to tell you the best part. She taught me how to make biscuits. The only thing to making biscuits is you put your flour in a bowl, and then you put some lard in with that, and you just take it and cut it all up, and then you make a well inside the bowl with the flour, and you make a well, and you pour some sweet milk in there, and then you just mingle it in there until the sweet milk is no longer liquid, and it mingles in with the lard and with the flour. And then you take a ball of it and you ball it up in your hand until you get a little biscuit, and you put it in a pan. Now, the pan that we made the biscuits in was like a cake pan. It was a metal cake pan, and inside that we had put a little tiny dollop of lard, and we set it in the oven and let it melt. And then we got it out, and we went like this until the melted lard covered the pan, greased the pan. And then we set it on the table, and as I made those biscuits like this in my hand one at a time, and then went like that on the bottom and put them into the pan, filled the pan with the biscuits, and let those cook in the oven at 350, I don't know, for like 20 minutes. So when it was all done, I had made my first pan of homemade biscuits, and there weren't any measurements. You just went by what it looked like and what it felt like with your hands. Homemade biscuits, fried eggs, and breakfast gravy. And every once in a while, I would take up a potato, and I would fry a potato up in another iron skillet. And that's what we had in the mornings for breakfast. Now, lots of times we ran out of sweet milk, so we would have to use water to make the breakfast gravy. And sometimes we would take bologna if we didn't have any sausage or any bacon, which we rarely had. Well, I rarely had when I was raising my kids. So we would take bologna and fry it in the skillet as our meat. But that was what we had for breakfast. And that was Sallie, my mother-in-law. I love my mother-in-law, Sallie. She taught me how to make a good, proper breakfast with breakfast gravy. And to this day, I can still make biscuits, fried eggs, and breakfast gravy. I don't have anybody to feed it to because my husband's diabetic. But to this day, I can make those things. And it's still really good, stick to your ribs eating. And I loved it. So thanks for this installment about how I learned how to cook from my mother-in-law. And I will tell you next time a story about how she taught me how to cook fried greens. It's enough years gone by right now that we can laugh about it now, but it wasn't funny then. But I'll tell you that story next time. See you then. Bye-bye.